What do you think the most important scene in the Chamber of Secrets is? What has the largest impact to change the direction of everything that is happening? In my opinion, the discovery of Tom Riddle's diary is the singular moment in which Harry's entire year gets flipped around. He meets the infamous Tom Riddle in a memory, finds out that Hagrid got expelled and blamed for the opening of the Chamber of Secrets 50 years prior, and without knowing it, he comes into contact with a piece of Lord Voldemort himself. It's no wonder that this moment in the movie plays such a big role, because after all, it does come at the halfway point of the story. But the truth behind how Harry discovers this magical artifact is hidden and warped compared to the original book version. How Harry finds the diary, how he learns its secrets, and even the memory Tom Riddle shows him is different in J.K. Rowling's original writings. So in this video, let's step into the wizarding world and unravel this mystery together, and find out exactly what happened in the book and all the changes that the film adaptation made to this critical moment. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to episode 28 of Movies vs. Manuscripts, Harry Potter Edition. This is the weekly show where I take your favorite wizarding movies and compare them to the books that inspired them, finding all the differences along the way. Today, we're at the halfway point of the Chamber of Secrets, and we've got a lot to cover as the movie pretty much went their own way with this part of the plot. Before we go any further though, I wanted to give a shout out to this commenter from a previous video. Each week, I highlight one of the top comments from a past episode, so be sure to share your thoughts down below when you're done watching. Per usual, I'll cover all the changes across the four major categories of characters, timeline, location, and plot. But first, let's recap what happened in the movie's version of these scenes before we dive into the book and all of the changes. Picking up from where we left off last week, we see Ron and Harry walking up some stairs in Hogwarts as they talk about how Hermione should be getting out of the hospital soon. They then see a ton of water all over the floor and run towards it to find out what happened. After realizing that the water is coming from Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, they run in and ask her what happened. They realize that Myrtle is the one who flooded things because she got upset as someone had just come in and threw a book through her head. Harry then sees the book and goes over and picks it up. The movie then cuts abruptly to later that day as Harry is in the Gryffindor common room alone. He opens up the diary and sees its pages are completely empty. He then takes a quill and some ink and writes in it, and to his shock, the ink disappears. Suddenly, the book writes back to him and introduces itself, and one thing leads to another, causing Harry to get sucked into the book itself and relive a memory of its owner, Tom Riddle. In the memory, Harry sees a boy in Hogwarts. The boy is watching as some other wizards carry a body down some stairs. Suddenly, Dumbledore calls for the boy, and Harry realizes that this student is Tom Riddle, the owner of the diary and the one showing him the memory. Dumbledore and Riddle talk about how Hogwarts will be closed if the person responsible for the attacks isn't caught, and Dumbledore seems suspicious of the boy, but Riddle denies knowing anything about the attacks. Harry then follows Riddle after he leaves Dumbledore and heads into the dungeons to eventually find a younger Hagrid in one of the rooms. Riddle confronts Hagrid and tells him that he'll have to turn him in, saying that he doesn't think Hagrid meant for it to kill anyone. Hagrid seems to be defending a wooden crate next to him, and Riddle uses a spell to open it. Suddenly, a spider comes crawling out and scurries away before Riddle can catch it, but he turns around and keeps Hagrid from leaving, saying that Hagrid will be expelled and they'll take his wand for this. And at that, the memory finishes and Harry gets launched back into the Gryffindor common room. And that is where we're stopping for this week, as this diary packs a punch and there's plenty to cover just in those short scenes. To start, let's take a look at our character, timeline, and location changes. First, for characters, there's a whole bunch of people missing. Let's start with Harry's fellow students. We're missing Ginny, Percy, Draco and his goons, and Hermione. As for Hogwarts faculty, we don't get to see Filch, Lockhart, or Headmaster Dippet. Dippet gets a mention by Dumbledore in the movie memory, but in the book, he actually has a conversation with Riddle, which we'll cover in the plot changes. Now moving on to timeline, the book is drastically different from the film, as the movie skips straight from their Polyjuice Potion mission, with Hermione turning into a cat, to Harry and Ron finding the diary in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. The book, however, explains events that take place over the course of weeks, with Christmas Day being the Polyjuice Potion mishap, and the ending of the chapter being Valentine's Day, which is February 14th. So nearly 2 months elapses over the course of this single chapter in the book. One could argue the same thing happens in the movie, but we miss out on a lot of critical moments during these weeks, which I personally wish were included in the film. And lastly, before we get to our plot changes, we have location. This week, there's a handful of places missing from these scenes. We've got Harry's dorm room, the trophy room, the Great Hall, which is decorated for a very special holiday occasion, and lastly, the headmaster's office. Each of these locations plays a key role in this chapter of the book, so tuck these away as we head into the plot changes. Of course, before we do though, I just want to remind you that I can't go word for word through the dialogue in the book, so if you're wanting to relive these moments for yourself, I'd highly encourage you to check out the audiobooks on Audible. You can claim your free trial using my link in the description, which supports the channel and gets you one free audiobook of your choice. So if you want, you can sign up and follow along with me each week as I do this series. Now that being said, let's dive into the plot changes. To start things off, the first change for this week plays into our timeline issue of the movie skipping straight to Harry's discovery of the diary. But here in the book, the first thing we read about is Hermione. After all, the previous chapter and scene in the movie just ended with her being turned into a cat. Although in the movie we do hear the boys briefly recite a couple of lines about Hermione getting out of the hospital wing soon, the book dives way more into her condition as we learn that other students thought she had been attacked since she disappeared for several weeks. After all, she is a Muggle-born. Once they found out that she was in the hospital wing though, Madame Pomfrey had to put curtains around her bed because so many students were walking by hoping to catch a glimpse of her as a cat. We then read that Harry and Ron went to visit her every evening, and once school started again, they brought her each day's homework and assignments. One day during a visit, Harry saw something golden underneath Hermione's pillow, and Ron snatched it. The boys then read it aloud as they realized it was a get well soon card from Lockhart, and Ron was disgusted that Hermione slept with it under her pillow. Like I've said in many previous episodes for this movie, Hermione is really quite obsessed with Lockhart in the book. Anyway, moving on to our second change, we now come to what we actually see in the movie, and the discovery of the diary. Our first change regarding what we see in the movie is actually the means by which the boys find out that Myrtle's bathroom has been flooded. You see, as they exited the hospital wing after visiting with Hermione, they heard Filch yelling from the floor above them. They could hear him talking about mopping something up, and then after he marched off in a disgruntled manner, the boys ran to the corridor where he was, which is the same corridor he had been guarding and where Mrs. Norris had been attacked many months ago. This is when they see the water on the ground and follow it into Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. As for Harry and Ron's interaction with Myrtle, that part is pretty much the same, and our next change actually has to do with the diary. In the movie, Harry picks it up as Ron watches, and then we immediately cut to the next scene. But in the book, Ron actually shouts out at Harry not to take the diary and jumps in the way. He then explains how his father has warned him about random objects being cursed, and he lists off a few examples of books that the Ministry has confiscated, including one that burns your eyes out if you read it. This is yet another example of Ron not necessarily being smart, but just being way more aware as he's been raised in the wizarding world. He knows better than to take random objects you find lying around a magical school, especially one that's been thrown at a ghost. Who knows what magical properties or curses it could contain? Of course, there's no way for Ron to know its true contents, but still, it's nice to see that in the book he's way more aware than he is in the movie. Anyway, after Ron's warnings, Harry slips past him and picks up the book anyway. And that brings us to our next change for the scene, which is that they removed or changed essentially all the markings on the diary. In the book, we read that the diary had the year it must have been used printed on the front. We don't learn what the year was exactly, but J.K. Rowling writes that it was 50 years old, so based on our own math, it would have had 1943 written on the cover. On top of this year being on the front, Harry opens it up and the first page has T.M. Riddle written on it. In the movie, the book does have Tom Marvolo Riddle written on the back, which somehow the boys completely missed when they found it in the bathroom, but in the book, it is just T.M. Riddle, and it's on the first page of the book, not on the back cover. Which brings up another change, because after Harry reads this name aloud, Ron says he recognizes it and that someone with that name won an award for services to the school. How would he know this? Well, if you recall from an early episode I did on the Chamber of Secrets, Ron got detention along with Harry. Although Harry was tasked with helping Lockhart with his fan mail, Ron got the fun job of polishing all the awards in the trophy room with Filch. At the time, he was sick with slugs and barfed up on Tom Riddle's award multiple times, which meant that he spent a while polishing just that one award, so it stuck in his mind. But other than the fact that a T.M. Riddle won the award, he couldn't recall any other information about it. The movie, of course, removes this entire plot point. Another small detail the movie removes about the diary is that when Harry flips through the pages, he also sees the address of the publisher and recognizes it as a Muggle address. This means that the diary isn't from a wizarding store, but a Muggle shop, and therefore the owner must have been part Muggle or at least been familiar with that area. Again, this is just another hint that the author drops about the identity of Tom Riddle, who we of course know by another name. And although we do see a small print on the first page in the movie that shows the shop name and the address, Harry doesn't say anything about it. Now, moving on past this scene in Myrtle's bathroom, the movie skips right to Harry in the Gryffindor common room, but the book contains a lot of information in between these two events, and probably most importantly, we learn how exactly Harry discovers the magical capabilities of the diary. But that's getting a little ahead of ourselves. So let's turn back the pages and take a look at what occurs after the boys left the bathroom with the diary. Can you guess what happens next? They take it to Hermione, of course. After all, they've been visiting her every day, so why not include her on this strange discovery? Now, technically, she wasn't still in the hospital wing, because the next thing we read is that she was released a couple days later, completely healed from her cat condition. But regardless, the change here is that the movie removes the discussion the trio has about the diary. Hermione immediately takes interest in the artifact and guesses that it might have magical properties. She tries a spell on it to no avail, and then also uses a revealer on it, which is a magical item she picked up from Diagon Alley. But another key moment from this time with our trio is that Hermione pieces together the clues and realizes that the date on the diary, 1943, is the exact date of the first time the chamber was opened, because Draco had said that his father told him it was about 50 years ago that it happened last. That is part of why she's so curious about the book, because whoever owned it definitely would have written about the events that year at school. After all, who has a diary but doesn't write down the craziest thing to happen to Hogwarts in centuries? Now, this next change is kind of a half change, but I'm still gonna count it. The movie removes a funny line that Ron has in the book, because it has to do with the award that Tom Riddle won. Like we already established, the award subplot isn't in the movie, so it wouldn't have made sense to include it. But anyway, in the book, Ron is trying to figure out what Riddle could have done to win an award for services to the school, and he names off a few possibilities like getting 30 OWLs, saving a teacher from the giant squid in the lake, or quote, maybe he murdered Moaning Myrtle. That would have done everyone a favor. Maybe it's a little on the nose, but I couldn't help but laugh a little bit when I read that part. Next, there's a small note in the book about Harry's relationship with the diary in the following days. We read that he couldn't explain it to himself, but he just couldn't bring himself to get rid of the diary, even though it was blank. He kept picking it up and absent-mindedly flipping through the pages, almost as if he was called to the book. Again, this is a glimpse into the diary's true nature, not only because it's a piece of Voldemort, but because it's connected to Harry specifically. After the short part about Harry's connection to the diary, the chapter goes on to give us another moment which the movie removed, and that is the trio's visit to the trophy room. Hermione and Harry were both curious to see this award in person and gather any more clues. While in the trophy room, they also find out that this Tom Riddle was a prefect and head boy as well because of another award he had won, which was a medal for magical merit. Next, the book goes on through the days and gives us some details of what happened as time progressed. These details are, of course, nowhere to be found in the movie. Here's what we miss. First, we learn that there had been no more attacks since the attack on Justin and nearly headless Nick. Harry thought, and was hoping, that perhaps the monster had gone into hibernation for another 50 years again, but other people in the school, like Ernie Macmillan and Peeves, were still spreading the rumor that Harry was just biding his time until he attacked again. The second detail we miss is that Professor Sprout told Filch that the mandrakes are now in their moody stage and are out of childhood. She adds that once their acne clears up, they'll be ready to cut up and use for potions to cure the petrified victims. And lastly, the third detail we miss is that Gilderoy Lockhart was trying to convince people that he was the reason the attacks had stopped. He was talking to McGonagall one day and telling her that whoever was behind the attacks probably got scared, as they knew it was only a matter of time before Lockhart caught them. He then told her that he had a plan to boost morale at the school, and that brings us to our next largest omission, which directly affects Harry's crucial discovery of the diary's secrets. And that is the Hogwarts Valentine's Day celebration, which is completely orchestrated by Lockhart. This has to be one of the craziest things that's removed from these movies. Much like the gnomes in the Weasley's garden, this part of the book contains some hilarious creatures Lockhart hires to be cupids who went around the school and delivered Valentine songs to people. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's rewind to the start of the day. We read that the days passed and eventually Valentine's Day was upon them. Harry, who had a long Quidditch practice the night before, had slept in and walked into the Great Hall thinking he was in the wrong location, because as he looked around, he saw the entire place was decked out in pink and Valentine's Day decorations. After eating, Lockhart stood up in the Great Hall and announced to the school that he had put together this little pick-me-up for them and that he had recruited some dwarves to deliver Valentines all day at school. And at that mention, in walked a dozen dwarves and Lockhart had them all wearing golden wings and carrying harps. Now, this might seem like a funny moment that the movie rightly removed, but what if I told you that our next change is perhaps the largest one of them all, and it includes these gruff-looking cupids? Well, buckle up, because our next change is all about how Harry actually finds out the magical properties of Tom Riddle's diary. We read that the Cupids Lockhart had hired were continually barging into classrooms all day, to the annoyance of the teachers, and in the afternoon, as the Gryffindors were heading to Charms class, a grim-looking dwarf approached Harry saying that he had a message to deliver to him. Harry immediately tried to escape, as he didn't like the idea of receiving a singing Valentine in front of everybody. But the dwarf would not give up so easily, and kicked his way to where Harry was, and then grabbed his bag as Harry tried to escape. During the struggle, Harry's bag ripped open and all of his items went spilling all over the floor, including red ink that he had been carrying. The ink covered all of his books, including Tom Riddle's diary. See where this is going? The major change here is that Harry doesn't just sit in the common room and start writing in the diary randomly, but what triggers him to try is the fact that after this incident, all of the ink on Tom Riddle's diary disappeared. But hold up, before we get to that, we first need to address another moment the movie removed, which is how Harry got the diary back. You see, after his items fell all over the floor, none other than Draco Malfoy came over and picked up the diary, thinking that it was Harry's. Harry quickly grew angry over Draco's bullying, as Malfoy refused to give it back. Harry became so upset that he pulled out his wand and used it to get the diary out of Draco's hand. This, of course, is against Hogwarts rules, as students can't use magic in the hallways, and Percy, who was standing right there, was quick to remind Harry of this. But Harry didn't care, as he had the diary back. On one hand, I would be upset too if Draco took something of mine that didn't belong to him, but another part of me would like to read into this moment a bit more and guess that Harry got so mad so quickly because of the effect that a Horcrux has on a person. But maybe that's just a little far-reaching. Anyway, it was only after this moment, and once they got to Charms class, that Harry took a look at the diary and noticed it was perfectly clean. But now we need to rewind here for a moment for the next change, because we missed out on the Valentine that Ginny Weasley sent to Harry. You see, after Draco gets embarrassed by Harry, he strikes back by pointing out Ginny in the crowd as the person who sent the Cupid to Harry. Ginny then ran away embarrassed, as Harry had obviously not appreciated her poem, which the dwarf Cupid had recited in front of everybody after ripping his bag open and spilling its contents everywhere. And speaking of the poem, it is quite hilarious, so I figured I would recite it here. Sorry, I won't be singing it, but it's still funny. Anyway, here it is. His eyes are as green as a fresh pickled toad. His hair is dark as a blackboard. I wish he was mine, he's really divine, the hero who conquered the Dark Lord. After this, Ginny's embarrassment wouldn't stop, because Fred and George kept going around the castle singing his eyes are as green as a fresh pickled toad, which really might be the most iconic Valentine's Day line. But now we can move on to our next change, as we finally are to the next scene we see here in the movie. I know we just covered a lot of omitted moments, but here we are with Harry actually getting into Tom Riddle's diary, just like what we see in this scene. Except, it wasn't just like what we see in the scene. The first change is a small one, but a change nonetheless, as Harry went to his bed earlier than everyone else so he could take a private look at the diary and test his new ink theory. In the movie, we just see him sitting in the common room where anybody could see him. Next, the movie removes a bit of dialogue between Tom Riddle and Harry as Harry writes in the diary. The movie is pretty quick in zapping Harry into the memory, but in the book we read that they spoke for a little bit, with Tom Riddle even sharing a decent amount of info, including the fact that he caught the person responsible last time, but the old headmaster made him stay quiet about the whole thing. And on that note, we can move into the memory itself, as Harry does eventually go inside the diary just like what we see in the movie. But there are 3 crucial changes regarding this memory. Pretty much the movie changed everything about it. So here's the real secret of Tom Riddle's diary. The first memory doesn't start with Harry seeing Tom Riddle watch Myrtle's body get removed from the castle. In fact, that isn't ever included in this memory from the book, which means that our next change is the fact that Harry begins the memory in a completely different place, the headmaster's office. Harry has now been there once before and believes it to be Dumbledore's, but quickly realizes that there would have been a different headmaster 50 years ago, and this is when we get introduced to Professor Armando Dippet. As Harry walked around the office, a boy came in to meet with the headmaster. The boy is Tom Riddle, and Harry listens in to their conversation as Dippet tells Riddle that they can't allow him to stay in the school over the summer. After this last attack, the school isn't safe, and Dippet reminds Riddle that his heritage is not a purebloods, therefore Riddle is at risk of being attacked. Dippet even mentions that the Ministry is talking about shutting the school down. Riddle obviously is affected by this comment and asks the headmaster if the school would be saved if the person behind the attacks was found. Dippet then has the lines we get from Dumbledore in the movie as he asks Riddle if he knows something about the attacks, but Riddle says he doesn't and leaves the office. And now we have our final change, which is pretty simple, and that is the fact that Tom Riddle runs into Dumbledore after leaving Dippett's office, but Dumbledore doesn't ask him anything like we see in the movie. After all, Dippet just did that. Dumbledore simply tells Riddle to head back to bed as it's late, and then he walks off, leaving Riddle to go search for Hagrid just like what we see in the movie. And honestly, the whole part with Hagrid is quite similar. The chapter then ends with Harry coming out of the memory and landing back in his bed in the dorms. Right after this, Ron comes into the dorms and asks Harry what's up, and then Harry tells him that Hagrid was the one who opened the chamber 50 years ago. And on that crazy plot twist, the chapter ends. So now that we've read it all, uncovered the great mysteries of Tom Riddle's diary, and set up the rest of the story for Harry's second year at Hogwarts, I want to hear from you. What was the craziest change the movie made to these scenes in the movie? What would you have done differently? Let me know in the comments below. If you're new here, thanks for sticking around until the end, and I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to like and subscribe if you did, and check out the series playlist linked in the description to catch up on all the episodes you might have missed so far. Other than that, have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.